You are now listening to the IELTS podcast. Learn from tutors and ex-examiners who are masters of IELTS preparation. Your host, Ben Worthington.
Hello there, IELTS students. In this podcast episode, we are going to focus entirely on IELTS reading. And we're going to look at the different types of reading. We're going to look at active reading and how to do it, how to get that skill. Then we're going to look at the habits, mindsets, and the routine. Because, one thing is knowing the actual material. And then the second thing is actually learning it and getting into the routine and developing a habit so you can always, basically to motivate you and make sure you do learn it. And then after that, we're going to look at some different exercises you can do. Maybe if you're allocating an hour a day to IELTS reading or whatever, then these exercises will be extremely useful. So let's get started. First of all, I got my knowledge from a book about how to read a book by Adler. I think it's called Mortimer and Adler. Those are the authors. A very old book by an American author. But I'd recommend, if you're interested in this, maybe if you're doing a PhD course or you're a student, then the book will be extremely valuable for you. Okay? So anyway, this book says, and I totally agree with everything in it, it says there's three types. There's elementary, inspectional, and analytical. Okay? So elementary is basically the first type that we learn, and that's about what does it say. Okay, the text, what's it saying? The second type is inspectional, and this is where we focus about what's it about, the structure of the text, and what are the parts, what's the order. And this is the most valuable type for IELTS. Okay, this is probably one of the most valuable types, and this is usually executed within time limit, okay, and it involves your pre-reading, your skimming, and getting a feel. Okay, so this is why it's important, because the IELTS reading section, it's under a time limit, hell of a lot of words. You've got to get through it. And then the third type is called analytical. Analytical reading is when we slow down and we go word for word and we are finding meaning. So I guess one attitude or one approach would be to do your inspectional reading. Then when you slow down, you go deeper and you do your analytical reading, basically to get the understanding. So those are the three types of reading that you can do. Now, what I'm going to teach you now is active reading, how to do your active reading. And this is extremely important because it will keep you awake, okay? Because if you're like me, as soon as you start reading, not as soon as, but within 10 or 15 minutes, you get sleepy, you get drowsy, and you start wandering, and you can get easily distracted. Okay, so if you're actively reading and you've got your pen and your paper and you're physically moving your body, you're highlighting and stuff like that, then there's much less chance of falling asleep. Okay, so it keeps you awake. Second, it helps you understand the text. Okay, especially if you're writing perhaps a mini summary, or I don't know, maybe if it's some other text, you might write false or just put interesting or whatever, but it's going to help you understand it a lot more. It's like the case if you've got something in your mind but you can't express it. Often it's because you don't really understand it. Whereas if you can express it, and expressing it in the form of writing, then it's pretty clear that you've understood it. Okay? And the third benefit of doing this active reading is that it helps you remember. Okay, because you've associated some physical action to that point of information. Going back to the more senses we involve in something, the more likely we are to remember it. So those are the three reasons to do active reading. Now, the instructions. Here are a few instructions to help you with your active reading. Okay, the first one is to underline or circle the important phrases that you have in your text. And jumping straight in, maybe you want to do a wiggly line underneath or just a straight underline. Okay, important phrases. Second type is vertical lines in the margins of the text, and perhaps we want to do that where we can see or we can read a passage that we think is extremely important, but it's just not practical to underline all the text there. So what we'll do is just put some vertical lines in the margins, and that's a good reference point for later. Third way we can actively read is by putting stars and asterisks in the margin. Okay, and maybe we want to do this for when we find important types of information. Like maybe you want to use an asterisk or a star for highlighting times and dates, numbers, measurements, which are quite common for IELTS reading questions. Okay, so we put a star there and we know exactly where to go to find dates, measurements, numbers, times, all that information. Now, if the reading text, if there's maybe, 10 paragraphs, and 3 of those paragraphs are dedicated entirely to describing an argument or a process or a system, perhaps we want to write 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever. Okay, and then this will help you just to follow the parts of the argument or parts of the process that's been described, and you can identify it immediately. Another technique to develop your active reading skills is to write in the margins, and you're writing your own subheadings. So perhaps you'll just see a big block of text, and in this case, in the exam, you want to go back to the text and you want to locate where that piece of information is. So you just put your subheadings there, and not only will it help you to remember, to understand, and to keep you active, to keep you awake. Of course, you're not going to fall asleep in the exam, but in other cases, in other circumstances. But by writing there in the margins, you're basically making a map of the actual article, which will definitely help you, especially come exam day. So those are the instructions for active reading. Now, perhaps the most important part of this podcast is the ability to actually apply this information. Now, applying the information means a lot of people, myself included, they'll read something and they'll think they'll enjoy it and they'll think it's valuable, and they'll make a mental note, okay, I'm going to do that. And it's really hard to implement that and to do it on a continuous, to implement it to a level where it actually does sort of like take hold and you do it like as a routine. So what I would recommend, and I've basically read a lot of books about this, and it's all about habits and routines. And you could say, I'm going to study IELTS reading 30 minutes every day for the rest of my life or whatever. But unless you attach the routine onto a routine that you already have, it's quite difficult to keep that routine going. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Every morning I have a coffee, and I used to just read the BBC and the news and stuff like that. But I really wanted to get into meditating and Tai Chi and all this stuff. So I just started watching videos, and it's part of the routine now to watch videos about that because it's just a skill that I wanted to learn. Now, in your case, what I would recommend is you open up a newspaper or an article on a web page or whatever you do when you have your morning coffee,
look at it
from an inspectional point of view. Okay. And this is what we were saying before, that I'm just about to do skimming. We're going to do the pre-reading,
develop your reading
get a
skills.
rough idea. Okay, so we're not going to approaching it. What I would like you to do, then word 2, then word 3, then word 4, then word 5. No, we're going to look at the title. We're going to just get a rough idea. Okay, and then we'll probably write the rough idea. Okay, something like the article talks about immigration in Europe, or the article talks about, global warming and America's response. Something like that. Okay, so we're just going to look at it and do the inspectional reading. Okay, the structure of the text and the parts. We're just going to look at an overview very, very quickly. Then we're going to answer these 4 questions. We're going to ask ourselves, what's it about? What's being said in detail? Is it wholly true? Is it partly true? And the final question, what of it? Okay, and is it important? Is it relevant? Okay, and this is where you're going to need your analytical skills. Okay, your analytical reading skills. So let me just go over that again. In the morning, you open up an article, you start reading. First, you're going to do your inspectional read. You're going to have a quick look at the title, skim up and down, write down what you think it's about. Okay, observe the structure, observe the parts of it, and then you're going to determine what's it about in the whole, as a whole, what's being said in detail. Okay, and then is it wholly true, partly true, and what of it? Is it important? Is it relevant? Okay, and doing this every morning and doing it quickly, maybe just giving yourself 20 minutes to do it per article. You're going to get faster at reading, and you're going to develop the most important skill, which is inspectional reading, which is your skimming and your pre-reading. Okay, so we're building these skills onto a routine and making it almost a habit, which is the goal. Now, if you are going to spend 3 months preparing for the IELTS, or maybe you've taken it numerous times and you've failed, and you're just taking a step back and you're going to say, okay, I'm not going to take it again until I really pass, then this next part of the podcast, we're going to look at very specific exercises you can do to develop each of the skills we've just mentioned. Okay, so the first one is pre-assessing an essay. Okay, and this might mean, well, not only an essay, but some reading text. Okay, this means just having a very quick look and then writing down what you think it's about. And you're going to observe the images, the title, maybe the region. Okay, and just look at all of this and then just write it down and have a summary. And when you're developing the skill, maybe you want to do it 2 or 3 times per session that you're going to be studying. Okay, so that's one skill to develop, which will help you with your reading exam. The next one is take some different articles, and then with those articles, read very quickly again, and then just trying to get the main point. Okay, so let me give you an example. Perhaps we're going to look at a cookery book, okay, just to get some different vocabulary, some new vocabulary, a topic that we're probably not too familiar with, okay, and then we're just going to skim over it, and maybe we want to determine whether it's good for our health. Okay, so what we can do is just have a quick look at all the article, the picture, and then look at the ingredients. Okay, and look at the ingredients, and we can determine, we can make an opinion whether it's, whether it's going to be beneficial for our health to cook this dish. Another example might be a car manual or maybe an IKEA instruction manual, and just quickly look over that. The main point would be to determine, is this going to be an easy operation, or should I pay somebody else to do it? All right. The next skill to develop would be called foreseeing, okay, predicting almost. And here what we're going to do is look at some text. Maybe it's a text about immigration in Syria or refugees in Syria, and we're going to predict just a very quick glimpse, and then just try and predict what the problem is, and the problem of the text is, okay? So we look at it and we think, okay, and then we try and pull on information that we've acquired from other sources and from general knowledge, from having a up-to-date worldview, and we know about current affairs, and then just trying to predict what it's going to be about, and then comparing our prediction to what the actual text turns out to be. And this is a good skill to develop, because you're also going to be pulling on vocabulary related to that topic without even going into much detail about the topic beforehand. Okay, so this is a good way to get your vocabulary going. And like I've said before, I think the more times you use the vocabulary, the more likely it is to remember it, because I won't go into an explanation now about neurology, but it's just more times you use it, the more likely you are to remember it. Right, then the second point is going into in-depth reading. Okay, and this is like what we were saying before. And for example, if we're going to do some cooking and we're going to follow some instructions, a recipe, then we're going to be reading analytically, and we're going to slow down. We're going to look at the measurements, we're going to look at the technique, and we're going to do it in a very detailed fashion. Okay, and this is like we said before. When you find a paragraph that is related to a question that you've had on your IELTS exam, then you're going to do your analytical reading. Okay, and more than likely it's a good point to just do it word by word. Okay. Another side point here is maybe you want to experiment by actually saying the words to yourself, okay, and just going like that and whispering it to yourself, because for some students it works a lot better than just trying to go over them in their head. All right. The final skill that I would recommend developing is called drawing word meaning from context. Okay, so sometimes we might come across a word that we do not know, and just from the context we have to draw an understanding. Okay, so let's see, I'll give you an example. His family gathered around him after he was knocked out, waiting for him to come around. Now, the phrase come around is composed of two words with different meanings, but when they're put together, they mean a different thing. They mean to arrive within a particular location close to the, to arrive within a particular location close to the speaker. Okay, and so when you do come across words that you don't understand, or it might be a phrasal verb that you're not totally familiar with, try to guess the meaning before going into the dictionary and finding it out specifically. Okay, and well, probably not with a dictionary nowadays, before punching it into Google. And a very good device to help you with your reading, and that's incredibly efficient, especially in this case, because I remember at university when I was learning Spanish and I had to go to the dictionary. It was such a waste of time. I thought I have to look at 20 other words before I find the word that I want, and I have to check blah blah blah, and then I get the translation, and it's so stupid. What I recommend you doing, okay, is when you do need to find the meaning of a word, do not go for the translation into your own language. Go for the definition in English, and this is going to build your vocabulary even more. And this is why I'm a massive fan of the ebook readers, especially the Kindle, because you can be reading some text and you might not know the word, so you just click the word, you just touch the word and you get the definition. You can even get the translation if you think it's necessary, but I always just put the definition there, and within 2 seconds you've got the meaning. And now what's even more interesting, which is, and I only discovered this about a week ago, is that in the Kindle, when you're searching through your books, one of the options is called Vocabulary Builder. And then what it is, it's like a series of flashcards and a mini game, and it helps you to determine and remember the actual meaning of the word that you learned. And that would be fantastic for any student who wants to get a high score in IELTS. And it builds your vocabulary, and everybody knows people with extensive vocabularies usually sound more intelligent than people without. All right, so I would definitely recommend investing in that. And plus, it's also good for your active reading skills. Of course, you're not going to grab a pencil and scribble all over it, but what you can do is highlight the text, add a note, and then later you can just look at all the highlights for that book, and you can go through and you're like, okay, this is what that meant. This was the expression that I wanted to use later for some other text. And you can even just log on to your Amazon account, and it's got all the highlights backed up there for you just to copy paste and dump into your Evernote or dump somewhere else. So that would be an absolute treasure chest, an absolute gold mine there for you to a gold mine, not a treasure chest, sorry, but a very valuable resource for you to consider investing in. And also another thing is that you will find that you do read more. You find that you read more books and you'll read faster as well. So now the final tip that I want to give you, or the final exercise that I'd recommend you do, is called discerning the tone of the writer. So if you're reading a wide variety of materials, maybe some scientific journals, maybe some economic reports, maybe some novels, maybe some longer stories, or even some commentary by a reader, by a writer in a newspaper. All of these have different tones, and a good exercise is to read it and just try and determine what tone. Okay, are they writing for younger readers? Are they writing for scientific experts? And doing this will just make us aware, okay, and make us aware of the different tones, and it'll give you a clue to the attitude and perspectives of the writer, which will help you to understand it better. Okay, now then, thanks for listening to all of this podcast. Now, remember to sign up, because I've been rewriting some of the newsletters, and I've been sending them out and getting massive response rates and lots of thank yous and stuff like that. So there's some incredible value there, and it'll definitely give you a push, not just intellectually, but also psychologically. You get the motivation and everything. So have a look at that. And if you've got any problems, if you're struggling with anything, just get in contact, shoot me an email, and we're all good. Okay? Have a great day, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.